Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Peacemaker, Season 1, Episode 6. So yeah, this was a filler episode. It wasn't that great. Just, I am so, really? I had to wait a week for this bullshit? I don't like how they're slowly, sloggingly setting up the villains in this story. And now we're taking this slow slog, slow motion walk that James Gunn, of course, is really traditionally good at, just slowing time down in a film or a show or whatever. Just like, hey man, how slowly can we just watch these villains just come into the fray of things and putting on this suit? And I'm just like, really? We had to, they have nothing going on in this episode. I guess the one thing that I forgot about from the other episode, the what I would call the Invasion of the Body Snatchers episode, was just that evidently this place was some bottle facility, some bottle thing that when they kept re-referencing the bottle facility, I'm like, who cares? But we end up finding out that I guess that this bottle facility is to be getting its stuff from this ranch somewhere, and this ranch is to supposedly have some cow. So are we gonna have some cow villain that is to be some another kind of goofy thing? Where if we were to have the gorilla from the episode before, now we're going to have a cow that is going to probably start attacking people. I think there was one thing where we did have a cow in the DC comic books of things, but I don't think it's probably going to be the exact same cow, but I could be wrong, because stuff weirdly like that just happens all the time. So within these episodes, every time I am to see kind of a filler thing, or every time that I'm seeing an episode that I don't like from any DC thing, I always just, in the back of my mind, is always just man, they could always go on and just take a wasted episode of some show and just take that time to showcase a character so that way they can go on and have this spin-off show, and then you would eventually just build up to I have never heard of so-and-so character, but it seems like now DC is investing in this character to showcase them early so they can go on to have them be a real legitimate thing somewhere down the road. Why is it that we only had Titans? We had Doom Patrol in Titans, and that was it. Because because we didn't have those characters casted yet, and when really looking at it, how the characters looked, the Doom Patrol characters looked in Titans wasn't the finished product of how they looked in Doom Patrol. I don't care. I know there was a guy that ended up getting recasted from that show, and then you got a bigger named actor to be on the Doom Patrol show. And so here's the thing, if you have only one character, not a group of people, there's a better chance that that person will go on and be involved in whatever spin-off. How is it that we can't have why can't we just have the Question for one episode of some show somewhere? We could have a very small character the Creeper, who's gonna miss who's gonna miss having the Creeper on an episode? There's so many DC characters that they can play around with And like HBO Max should probably have a lot more money than CW does, but like it doesn't feel like that. It feels like HBO Max and the CW have as equally as much money as one another. I don't know. It just is what it is with this episode. Like, man, how we can't have like Metamorpho, how we can't have the Creeper, the freaking we can't have Doctor Fate somewhere, like a Doctor Fate show. Like, how we can't have all these rattling off spin-offs. Because we are technically having, I think Doctor Fate is going to be in the Black Adam movie. I guess he's going to be Pierce Brosnan. Sure. But man, like DC needs to just start rattling off some shows. If they're not going to be doing some movies anytime soon, they just need to start rattling off some shows. Like DC has the slowest freaking build for a DCU that I have ever freaking seen, and then they have to go backwards because it's like, well, I guess this DCU thing just isn't really going to work out. There's not going to be a Justice League 2 coming somewhere out of the darkness. So we just have to be like fine with just like continuing to create these one-off films, but we have Marvel who just cranking out all of this stuff all over the gosh darn place, and we have DC who's just hilariously behind at this point, to where even if they have a streaming service like HBO Max, they're not going to be popping out shows at all. It's ridiculous. Supposedly we had like the Sandman that was to be put on Netflix, but I haven't seen any trailers, any something that would trip my trigger to be more interested about that show. So now going into this product, talking about this product, frustrated about this episode because it goes nowhere. Hopefully, it shouldn't take very long to review this episode because it sucked. And it sucked because there was nothing really that I was like, why do I need to know any of this information whatsoever? Really, if you could have given me bullet points, show, like really, I could have had a 5 minute show to explain me, or 5 minute part of the show to explain all I needed to know about the show. Like, really, I could go on and recap for next week and not have missed a thing. So, man, all I needed was a recap to just be like, oh, this character's doing this now? Okay, great. That's all I needed to know. So, speaking of recap, let's go into that double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers. Like, if I go on and I basically tell you what happens as a teeing up fashion within the show, there's then not for much for me to say. Because there's not much going on in the show. The teeing up of villains, showcasing who the villains are going to still be in this show if it isn't a massive mystery. We really just have that being done. We really just have it to where Peacemaker is to supposedly to be under arrest, for him to then not to be under arrest, and for him to figure out a way to get out of that whole situation. And yeah, so that's it. That's so let's go into spoilers because there's not much to go on and say in this episode. So spoiler time. It's about the time we get to spoil this episode. So the beginning of the episode, we of course have what is this guy's name? Myrn. Myrn is to have gone on in the last episode with Leota, and Leota is to find out that Myrn is to be a alien. And so we go on and have Harcourt that is to walk on and be like, hey guys, because we have it to where Leota is to find out that Myrrh is an alien, and so Hardcore is to find out about that. And so Amelia is like, oh yeah, I already know. So here's your gun back because like he's on our side. And she's like, what? And so they're like, well, yeah, like we have Judo Master who is to go on and say that these butterflies aren't what they seem, and we end up finding that out simply by Myrn, who is to go on and explain to us that this guy was to be a bad guy, but there was some potential for turnaround for this guy. But since this butterfly had gone inside Myrn, he'll never know that opportunity of this guy ever going and reaching his full potential or reversing back to a better man. He'll never realize that or figure that out. So we go on into this story, and so we have, of course, now Peacemaker that is going and feeding Goth, which is to be this butterfly. And so we, of course, have Vigilante that stops on by. We find out that Peacemaker is to have Goth make the symbol of peace on his jar. And so now, since Vigilante is to realize that Peacemaker has this Goth, they're going and they're trying to ask him a series of questions that are all yes and no questions. But we have Vigilante keep continuing to go on and trying to ask him like what his favorite color is and all these stupid questions. And so we go on, we have them continue to ask all these really dumb questions. So we, of course, have Myrn, who is finding out, along with this group, that the police are coming for, of course, Peacemaker, because Peacemaker's father has been released. And so we have Augie, who is going and talking to Sophie and is basically just humiliating her with this kind of racial thing of sorts. So we also had at some point where Peacemaker was to go to Jamil's daughter's take your relative to work day. I say that because like this wasn't to actually be this or no wait, take your relative to school day. That's what I meant. So we have Peacemaker, who's not actually a relative to this girl, but it seems that this guy was to be, or Jamil was to be this guy who wasn't important enough. And so he, I guess, got tired that there was to be this one guy who was to be this veterinarian, and a lot of kids would ask that guy questions. So figure go on and get a superhero to come in there like, yeah, this is great. And so this girl can feel good about having somebody that she knows is a superhero. So we go on, we have Peacemaker asking or answering all these questions from all of these, I'm assuming, fifth graders, because Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader is something that, of course, John Cena was involved in. And wouldn't that be a quinky dink if really those were all fifth graders? Because it would be funny. So we go on and we have Peacemaker answering bunch of questions, as well as him asking certain people to raise their hands. So we go on and they, of course, ask him about, like, hey, have you ever seen The Flash? Have you ever seen Wonder Woman? Have you ever seen, of course, any of the big characters? Because heaven forbid you go on and ask, like, hey, have you ever seen Animal Man? Hey, have you ever seen anybody else in the DC world that's actually really cool and really important? Like, hey, have you ever seen the Green Lantern? Does he look like Ryan Reynolds? Uh, uh, they could have asked any kind of goofy question. Um, they could have asked like a lot of fun questions, but instead they just asked like the big fat juicy succulent. Oh yeah, have you seen Wonder Woman? Have you seen the Flash? Because those are the only important characters in the DC world, right? Because there's going to be a Flash movie coming out, and I guess since Wonder Woman movie was so big and whatever, just so after we go on, we have the Peacemaker that, of course, is to do all these questions, and he doesn't really curse; he just says effing. We go on, and we have, of course, uh, Camille, who is to be so grateful that Peacemaker is to kind of help him out in this bind. And so now we're off, and we have Peacemaker back with Vigilante going on and talking to Goff. So we of course have Sophie and Larry that of course is going after Peacemaker, and so we have Myrn who's trying to call Peacemaker's cell, and he won't pick up. So we have, of course, Myrn who decides, because the group is to tell him, it's like, well, hey, how about you just call Vigilante? So they call Vigilante, and Vigilante is saying, like, oh, this isn't my phone, this is someone else's phone. And, like, Peacemaker is to realize that this is, of course, Myrn. So he's like, hey, what's going on? And so they end up, of course, telling him the police is after him. So we, of course, go on and have Peacemaker that's going and taking Eagly and helping him out of this little this little trailer. And then John or Peacemaker gets out of the trailer, and then of course Vigilante is now taping Golf to his chest so that way he can go on and have hands free. But he'll go on at some point and break the jar of Golf to get him to go inside of Sophie as they're trying to run out of here. Because that's what happens next. After they go on, and Sophie is just kind of going around and trying to figure out, like, hey, it seems like Eagly is on the rooftop there, and so they keep circling around. Both Peacemaker and Vigilante are kind of hanging on to these trees, and then Sophie ends up getting Goff inside of her. Larry is to try to protect Sophie as she may have a concussion or any number of things. But so what Sophie turns around and does is to go on and have every single number of her aliens kind of arrive in their ships later on in this episode. And she goes and has her butterflies all go inside every single one of the, of course, police officers and uh, people that are in prison, to infect all of them to all be butterflies, and they're all like, they're weirdly looking very Joker-esque with their smiles. So I'm like, is this Joker or is this Butterfly? Whatever. So while that's going on, we of course have Augie, who's getting out of prison, and he is to go and tell one guy that he's like, yeah, I'm gonna get some woman to give me a BJ, and then I'm gonna go on and go and kill my son. So we then have the slow motion build of White Dragon going on, and after he gets this BJ from this girl, who we find is just putting on this white mask of sorts. We go on and we find that White Dragon is going to find his costume, and have a number of his minions go and put his costume on, and that's to just kind of set up that garbage. So the police officers are going and ransacking Peacemaker's trailer to go and have one of the policemen go and find this diary that Leota was to place in there. So we have this detective going and giving this this diary to Captain Locke, and he's like, "Oh, thanks, great. I'm gonna put this off to the side for him to use later to go on and say that Peacemaker was to go on and supposedly kill a number of people who were allegedly all butterflies within this diary, but that's not who they really were. That they were all aliens, and Peacemaker was to have this conspiracy theory that these guys were all aliens, but they weren't. So we have it to, of course, now if Peacemaker wasn't on the run before, now he's really on the run, for everybody to just be looking out for him. And that's how they kind of end this episode. But we have a moment where also, I'm just going to cover and backpedal here for some of the other stuff that I didn't cover. We have a moment where both Harcourt and Peacemaker, where Harcourt was making a Dove of Peace logo on, of course, Peacemaker's weapon, and he's like, well, it's not faced the right way. And she's like, really? It's like okay, fine. But we have Peacemaker, who I guess is to be very much a guy of peace instead of being a guy of war anymore, because he goes on, he's like, no, like, I don't think that I can go on and kill people. And so she's like, well, what about people who are butterflies? And he's like, well, I think I can kill them. Like, well, why didn't he pull the trigger from episodes before? Like, obviously, all of those characters were all butterflies from before. So, I just don't think that he's probably going to kill anybody. So, what is the point of this character? Is he going to go on and get killed after this mission is to just be over? And then we're going to have this only be a one-off or one-season kind of deal? That's where I'm kind of, like, having this thought process of when you're really thinking about it. Is Peacemaker just going to head back to jail at the end of this season? Or I'm assuming he's just going to get his head blown off because Waller can just go on and just say, it's like, well, hey, if you're not going to go and kill people, then what do I need you for? Nothing. So further on here, because I'm assuming there's probably got to be a spin-off or some other Suicide Squad show or something. There's got to be some kind of spin-off somewhere in the distance or somewhere. There's got to be something. You can't just do all these, like, barely any DC shows. It's like, well, what's the CW? What are they doing? I don't know how many shows that they've either canceled or just, like, they barely have nothing for the CW. Man, did they used to, like, for the CW, they had, like, so many freaking things and so many shows. Now, it's just like a ghost town. It's getting to be that the only real show that the CW has is Superman and Lois, and even with that, I'm just like, that show is just, like, not that good. To where it's going to be their only flagship show once the Flash is going to wrap up, and Batwoman is, like, non-existent, to the point of, like, shouldn't that show have gotten canceled by now? So yeah. So what else happens in this episode? Nothing of real utter importance, but no, I think that's it. That's all that happens, because there's nothing that happens in the show. Oh, we know that John was to, of course, know that Myrn was to, of course, be an alien, but every time that somebody is to try to mention it, John goes in to put ears into his, or fingers in his ears to not hear these guys talk about it, because John doesn't want Waller to think that he has some information that she doesn't, and that John could probably get killed because of that information. So, so yeah. With that said, that's pretty much the show. That's pretty much all that really needs to be covered in this show. Man, I can't wait for just could we please get some like more superhero stuff out? I would love to have a lot of just superhero stuff to cover. And I mean, like, I'm not saying, like, hey, let's just have a bajillion movies and whatever. I would love there to be just a lot more, like, superhero shows. I think there could be a lot more done here. Either, like, stuff that is to be owned by some company somewhere, or there could really just be an actual just, hey, let's make up this character. Great, because I miss those days. I miss those days where we'd have like a variety of different kinds of superhero stuff coming out, where it's like all of a sudden we have like we have Umbrella Academy and we have Jupiter's Legacy and we have all this stuff that just came out uh, all at whatever goofy, odd, off color time, with a combination of like, oh hey yeah, here's also like the Marvel stuff and the DC comic book stuff and blah 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 blah. And I know Jupiter's Legacy and Umbrella Academy didn't come off at the same time. I'm just kind of saying like those are like unique cases where we'd go on and have all this comic book stuff that is to like eventually get covered all at the same time. It's like, ooh wow, this is all miraculous. This is great. And then all of a sudden it's like gone. It's gone. Just like my utter, just like, man, these next Peacemaker episodes better be freaking just amazing. To where I'm like, oh my god. Or otherwise, I'm just gonna be like, wow, this show, like, it started out pretty interesting, but man, did it go into a direction that I'm just like, and like, I don't think that I wanted, I don't think I really wanted anything that was to be just like too crazy for a DC show. Like, I don't think I'd be asking, like, I'm thinking of like, hey, let's get some small freaking characters and just have them fill some time in a show. Like, let's get freaking, like, if it takes, like, let's go and get a weird, goofy Aztec character, like, that was called Aztec. Or let's go and let's get freaking, uh, if not Animal Man, go and get freaking the Question. Go and get the Phantom Stranger. Or let's get some weird, goofy off characters that makes no sense. Just put in a show. Let's just cram them in there. Freaking why not? For the love of God, can we just get some more like let's steal some stuff from like Batman's world or something. Let's go, shows. Come on. Why did we have so many characters from Arrow that just went nowhere? Like we had like Ragman, and we had freaking the one uh God, what was that goofy character? The hockey guy, whatever the hockey guy was, I have no clue who he was. I didn't understand that character at all. And we had like Mr. Terrific. What the was that character even about? He was just some tech guy. Like it seems like Mr. Terrific is never terrific in anything that he's ever in. Like that's really just a non hilariously existent character. I don't understand how Mr. Terrific is all that terrific. I never understood it. Um, and there is never a show that is to showcase that character well. They could have honestly had it to where this whole entire time we could have had a Mr. Terrific in the show, and then they could have really revealed it at the very end that this was Mr. Terrific. That would have been interesting. If we would have found out somehow that these characters would have been actually legitimate comic book characters all along instead of just these makeshift characters that is just to be like me giving a crap about them for like, oh hey yeah, like I wish that somebody would have been legitimately like well interesting in the mythos of comic bookdom or whatever for DC. That these aren't even words I'm using. They're not even used correctly. But anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. I've wasted so much of your time. I apologize, but man, I just feel so tempted to just do a video to just like what comic book characters could just be used in any medium. I would just rattle off all these characters of interesting comic books that I have heard of randomly, like recently. Um, like I would go on and probably put like a top 10, but then I'd probably rattle off at the end a number of other characters. Um, that I feel should go on and be a show somewhere or a movie somewhere. I think it'd be much more interesting to do a show probably, but like I think there's certain characters where I think they would probably want to go on and just do like a one-off film, and that would be cool. Because at least it would get that kind of it would just chuck that thing out there. Um, but anyways, I'm just gonna get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.